This video will be on the US economy and the Federal Reserve and also the inequalities in American society. Now, it will also be about the interview between BBC's Matt Frie and Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winning economist.
We are following the money.
Well, everything that made you rich made me poor. Everything that made you rich made me poor.
Barely a week goes by without some new study trumpeting the ever-widening gap between rich and poor. In fact, gap really doesn't do it justice, more like chasm or ocean. Researchers in the UK this week said that British families haven't been so badly off for the best part of a century. Here in the US, the major indicators of economic health are still in the red. Home sales are still falling, and unemployment looks firmly lodged at just under 9%. But those who sit in America's maple-lined boardrooms have, arguably, rarely had it so good. The New York Times recently commissioned a study showing that, on average, profits for big business shot up by nearly 30% in the last quarter of 2010. Not surprisingly, CEOs are awarding themselves salary increases and stock options to match. If you looked at the Dow Jones for evidence of how USS America is faring, you'd think that this ship, far from sinking, was under full sail again. Well, joining me to discuss all this is Professor Joseph Stiglitz of Columbia University. He served as the chief economist for the World Bank. He picked up the Nobel Prize for economics back in 2001. And he's surely one of the most quoted economists in America today. Welcome to the program.
Nice to be here.
So, we were talking about the gulf between rich and poor, the chasm. Just how bad is it, and why did it get so bad?
The number that captures my attention is the fact that 1% of the population, the upper 1%, gets just around a quarter of all national income. And depending on how you measure it, they have around 40% of wealth. That's outstanding, and it's much higher, about twice as high, as it was just 10, 20 years ago. Other countries like Brazil that used to have high levels of inequality have been working very hard to reduce it. China is a country where inequality has increased a lot, but doing something about it has become a central point of their government policy. It is not on the agenda in the United States.
Why is that?
Well, I suppose you might say is because those who run the government, the upper 1%, don't want it to be on the agenda. They like things the way they are. I think what brought it to the attention of so many Americans was the financial crisis, where we saw in the aftermath of the crisis those on Wall Street walking off with mega bonuses.
Well, you mentioned the people there with their bonuses. We set out to meet some of them at Harry's Bar on Wall Street this week, just as the bankers and traders were turning up for happy hour. Here's what they had to say.
Let me tell you something about what the guys on Wall Street get paid. If they could find someone to do what we do for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, we would all be replaced tomorrow. They can't. You can't have Joe Sixpack come in and give him a job working at Goldman Sachs, the managing director, and try and fix all the problems of the world.
I think bankers are scapegoats. Software companies make a ton of money. Nobody's attacking them. Who's attacking the lawyers? Who's attacking the entertainment industry? Who's attacking everybody out there who's in as lucrative or a more lucrative industry?
At the end of the day, you might be making more money, but you're paying more in taxes. There's no pension. There's no safety net.
Wall Street is basically an eat what you kill environment. If you make $1 billion a year, you should be paid what other people make.
Happy hour indeed there, Joseph Stiglitz, don't you think?
Very much so. You know, the interesting thing is if you think about people who've really changed our society, the person who invented the transistor, the laser, innovations that really have transformed our society, they get a fraction of what those on Wall Street who contributed to creating the greatest crisis in 75 years make. The underlying problem is that rewards in Wall Street are not aligned with social returns.
I mean, bankers are arguably less popular now even than lawyers, but the kind of attitude that we heard there, does that surprise you?
No, they should be quite happy. They've done very well by themselves. And because we, the taxpayers, bailed them out, they haven't had to pay the consequences of what they did. And I think that is one of the factors also that has contributed to, you might say, the anger.
Well, let's listen to some people who are still out there looking for jobs. And in fact, we went to a jobs fair in Detroit this week, and the tone there was somewhat different.
It's really tough to be out of work for so long.
I've been unemployed for 3 years.
The rich is getting richer, and people are getting poorer, thrown out of homes.
The companies in America have more cash on hand than ever before, and yet they refuse to hire.
It's sad when I got to see people out pushing their cars on the street because they done ran out of gas because they don't have enough money to keep gas in their car.
I expected to retire and sell my house when I retired and turn around and use the income so I could live. Now I can't do it because my house already took a $60,000 loss. You're going to have the rich and the poor. There ain't going to be no middle class.
I'm extremely upset about Wall Street, all the CEOs, all the executives that are literally raping the country.
These bankers and CEOs making all of this money and the bonuses. It just isn't right.
It's very disgusting. I'm considering a move to Europe.
Wow, that's radical. A move to Europe, Joseph Stiglitz. How squeezed is America's middle class?
Very, and actually this question about move to Europe is an interesting one. The United States used to define itself as a land of opportunity, and it's very much part of our identity. Anybody could go from poor to the middle class to the heights of power, economic status, but statistically, it's a myth.
But most Americans don't see it that way, do they? I mean, they still believe, the majority of people in this country still believe in the American dream.
That's right, but I think they are beginning to change because as people confront reality, they see what's happening to them, their children, their neighbors' children. That reality will eventually sink in.
Well, someone who would share your, let's say, dormant optimism is a woman called Lynn Tilton. Now, she's the last voice I want you to hear in this segment. By her own account, she's America's most successful female CEO. She owns a company called Patriarch Partners, which she says is busy rebuilding America's industrial base. Listen.
The number one issue in this country is joblessness. We must look for the direct solution to the problem, and that is industrial policy. We must be the maker of things in this country.
You yourself talked earlier about short-term greed. Your former employers, Goldman Sachs, have come in for a lot of flack from politicians and from the public. Do you think that's justified?
Look, I mean, I believe that, Wall Street is bad for America when it stops being about supporting corporate America, but just about making money and making trading profits. I believe that the world should be different. I think that the divide between Wall Street and Main Street will end badly for America. It could even end with violence in the streets of America. Unless we begin to create jobs in America, people are going to start to revolt. They're not going to stand for it. We are de-evolving as a nation, and that's really the worst thing that can happen. It's still the greatest country in the world. We have the greatest, collateral laws. We have great human capital, but there needs to be a direction where people can stand shoulder to shoulder to create that great force of nature to rise from the abyss that we're creating.
Lynn Tilton there, the CEO of Patriarch Partners. Professor Stiglitz, Greek-style violence on the streets of this country. Do you agree that might happen?
Well, I certainly agree very much with Lynn's diagnosis of the problem. I think it will inevitably lead to one form or another of social unrest. The worst-case scenario is that as we seek to blame others, we engage in nationalistic activities. In the past, countries have wound up looking for somebody to fight. The United States, this is a particular concern because we have such a big military establishment, and we have so many guns, it's hard not to use them or abuse them, as we've seen. So you could see a number of counterproductive reactions that would be very destructive, both to our standard of living and to even basic rights.
Professor Joseph Stiglitz of Columbia University in